Jó napot kívánok még egyszer. Good to see you again for the third time today. We have 30 minutes to answer a $1 million, or rather €1 million question, which is there will still be a European Union in the long run. So basically, will it last or not? Is it in the decline or not? And so we will need probably 6 months to answer this question, and we will have 28 minutes. And 3 guests that are going to join us on stage, and I'm going to introduce them to you. And then we're going to do a speed dating very, very quickly into the questions. So may I ask to join on stage, please, David Engels, Thomas Fazi, and Peter Ungar. And so before we jump into the game, 2 things. First, let me quickly introduce the speakers. Peter Ungar, Magyar, Vaj, and he's a member of the National Parliament and for LMP. David Engels, a Belgian citizen who is now based in Poland, historian, author, and also professor in the Catholic University of Vendée in France. Thomas Fazi, geopolitical provocateur, journalist.
I love that.
Half Italian, half Irish, and somebody who also knows Budapest very, very well. And before we start, we need to hear you. We need to know what you think. And for that, we are going to make you clap. So the question is, as I told you already, will there still be a European Union in the long run? Do you think that by the time you will retire or you will have a family, for the younger people in the room, let's say in 20 or 30 years, will we still have a European Union? So to phrase it exactly, the EU will collapse on the long run, yes or no? So those who agree with yes, who think that it's going to collapse, please clap now. Thank you. And for those who think that the EU will not collapse in the long run, clap now. The knowers, the optimistic people in the room, are winning so far. Will be the case at the end of this debate in 27 minutes. We will ask you to clap again. But in the meantime, let me ask exactly the same question to our guests. Is there a point actually in this question at all? And do you think indeed that the EU is going to collapse in the long run? Thomas, maybe we can start with you.
I hope so. Honestly, I mean, whatever metric you take, I think, whatever angle you look at the EU from, whether it's the economic angle, the political democratic angle, or the geopolitical angle these days, I think it's hard to conclude that anything other than the EU having been quite a catastrophic failure. I think in economic terms, the European Union has experienced what economists refer to as a lost decade following the financial crisis. The European economy has been diverging dramatically vis-à-vis other advanced economies, first and foremost the US. And this is primarily, I would say, a result of the flawed architecture of the European Union. In political democratic terms, again, I think it's been utterly catastrophic and a failure in a sense that what we have now is this incredibly powerful, unaccountable, undemocratic institution that is able to override decisions that are taken democratically at the national level. And this is, of course, provoking, a stronger and stronger political backlash, which I think is totally justified. And I think when we look at the geopolitical aspect, the European Union was supposed to deliver us strategic autonomy, first and foremost, from our friends on the other side of the Atlantic, from America. That was one of the arguments that we kept hearing. We need the European Union to become more autonomous from America. Well, what do we have now? We have a European Union that is basically an extended arm of the United States, of NATO, with zero strategic autonomy whatsoever. So also a complete failure, I would say, in geopolitical terms, not to mention the fact that it's pushing us towards a catastrophic war with Russia. So I think there's no doubt that it's been a failure, but that doesn't mean that for that there are any intrinsic, reasons for why this should lead to its, collapse. I think much will depend in whether what people will do at the national level. For how long will people accept this state of affairs? If people don't react, it could go on for a very long time. If people finally, rise up, it could, it could go extinct quite soon, I think.
Thank you. Very clear, straightforward.
Okay.
David Engels, what about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a historian, so if I see on the one hand, will the European Union collapse in the long run, and then the long run is 2030, that is 6 years only. Of course, my vision on long run as an ancient historian is at least 100 years or 150 years or so on. But if I play the game that the long run really means the next 6 years, I think that first we have to make the division between should it collapse or will it collapse? And now I will rather respond to what I expect that will happen, not necessarily what I wish, but what I expect to happen. And so I think that in 6 years, yes, there will still be a European Union, but that will be in full transformation. I think that in 6 years we will have even more this strange, let's say, situation where we have a European Union that is more or less impotent to the outside, but that becomes more and more authoritarian to the inside. That will be able, for example, to be sure that we all drink out of plastic bottles with attached caps. That is something that is possible for the European Union, but finding a common stance on a war that is just right on its frontiers, that's not possible, obviously. So this will continue. I think this will continue even more so. But on the terrain, in reality, especially in Western Europe, we will have a situation more and more of failed states and of civil unrest. We will have nation-states that will barely control the big cities, with the peripheries falling more and more prey to Muslim or other parallel societies, and the provinces around that are more and more desertic. And I think this will be a very conflictual situation in which we will be certainly in 6 years. And what will be the future out of that? Well, I wrote a book where I tried to show, it's available also in Hungarian, where I try to show that there are big similarities between the crisis of the European Union today and the fall of the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC. Not the Roman Empire, but the Roman Republic. And I think our European continent will go through a phase of civil unrest, of disaster, of inner chaos, out of which I expect a new form of political common European organization to rise. Will it still be the European Union or something a little bit else? That I don't know. But I see that in all late civilization days, this effect of forming something that can be called a civilization state, a civilization empire, and I think that is what we will have on the long run. Is it good? Is it bad? I think that depends, of course, on the ideology that will be behind. But at the same time, if I can be normative, I think that it will be necessary for our European continent to speak with a common voice in order to defend us against the competition from China, against mass migration from the Mediterranean, against also the ambition of Russia, against also the US. And I think that we need something like that. And I guess that also at the end of this phase of unrest, some centralized organism like the EU or perhaps else will rise, that will be able once again to defend our interests to the outside, and that will be able to leave people in the inside free. And today we have exactly the contrary.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And very good point about this possible tendency now of autocracy. And it's true that, for example, when you consider that 21 Hungarian universities are excluded from Erasmus for absolutely no reasons, that basically echoes very much what you said. But Peter, would you bring a bit of Magyar optimismus into the discussion?
I mean, it's very great that I get to go third, because I have rarely disagreed with such fervor about statements. First of all, I don't believe in this unified European point of view. I don't believe that Europe exists as a political subject in this way. I believe that the small nations on the East have different interests, very much so than those in the center of Europe. And for us, this strategic autonomy is a lot of times basically a synonym for a German and French control. And I don't know if you saw The Fiddler on the Roof, that wonderful musical, that the Tsar should be kept in good health, but very far away. So this is, I think, the point in why the European Union can only exist if it's part of the transatlantic architecture, which is a good thing that it exists and not a bad thing. And this transatlantic architecture, I believe, will exist in 2030. So the European Union will also exist. It will be a dog with 3 legs and 1 eye and without 1 ear, but nonetheless it will be alive. And European history has shown that a lot of things that were barely alive were going on for a very long time, like the Holy Roman Empire, which you know very well, that a lot better than me, that existed without any actual power for a long time. It will be a very similar thing. But other than that, I don't believe that this Western European declinism, which kind of filters into our conversation, which talks about, oh my God, Indonesia will have in the world more power than the Netherlands. Me as a Hungarian, that I think is a good thing because there are more people there. So this idea of declinism, which is into this question, which is brought into the idea that different cultures will be there, that the provinces will be empty, that's the tragedy of others.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting point, and it's true that if I want to play with the devil's advocate, is like stories of the decline of the EU started with the beginning of the EU. We have been promising decline, and even the EU, we thought it would disappear since basically it has been created. And actually it has been going only in crescendo, moving, let's say, in the direction of more integration. The euro was supposed to collapse, it didn't collapse. Before that, Maastricht was not supposed to be adopted, it was adopted. It was supposed to be contested, it is still there. The EU survived the economic crisis. Now we thought that with Ukraine and now a new geopolitical paradigm, it was going to die. Here it is. So aren't we a bit prophets of doom sometimes? Because at the end, here it is, and for example, a good example of it is like the popular support that the European Union has here in Hungary. A lot of things are happening, the popular support is still very high. Let's be realistic. Can we live, can Hungary live, can Spain live, can Italy live without the internal market, without Schengen? Now we speak a lot about migration, but do you think that basically this is not only protests and provocation, but I don't see the leaders changing the European Union. I don't see the majority of the voters doing that in the European sphere. So what are we talking about exactly? And again, what if there is a crisis now, what is going to be next? Are you afraid more of the economy, more of migration? Do you think that the threat is more geopolitic? How do you see, again, like that? And let me challenge you. I mean, you see a lot of decline, especially Thomas and David, especially you, Thomas, because David at least sees some hope in the very long run, in the historian time. I don't see it. And since I study the European Union, it was supposed to collapse, and I just see it stronger than ever.
Look, I think when we ask the question, is the European Union working? I think, we have to clarify that with working for whom? That's too much of a general question. So, of course, if we look at the political angle, it's worked very well for political elites. They've been able to centralize power, move power away from the masses, hollow out democracy at the national level, insulate themselves from any form of democratic pressure. Now essentially we have an institution that is, subject to almost no democratic control whatsoever, the European Commission, which essentially rules over every area of policy.
It's elected by the European Parliament.
Sorry?
It's elected by the European Parliament, which is elected by everyone in the room here.
The European Parliament has no power of, once it's elected the Commission, it has very little power to actually rein in the Commission's policies. So, it can't vote the Commission out. So, I mean, I would say it's it's definitely not a democratic system in the traditional understanding that we have of democracy. So it's worked very well for elites. But has it worked well for ordinary people from a political perspective? Ordinary people today in EU countries, especially in Euro countries, so countries that have even lost their basic monetary sovereignty, their currency, citizens can vote for whatever party they want. They can elect whoever they want, but whoever they elect will be unable to pursue policies that are not aligned with the status quo. because that requires economic tools that today countries don't have, because those tools are held in Brussels and Frankfurt. This is not a democratic system, and this is what a lot of citizens are revolting against. This idea that, they have no control over their destiny anymore, because, they can vote for the left, for the right, for the center, and they keep getting the same policies, because ultimately it's the European Union that decides. Economically, it's the same. You could argue that from the perspective of big banks and certain select corporations, big export-oriented companies, the European Union, especially in terms of how it's been very effective at keeping wages down, especially in Western Europe, has proven beneficial. From the perspective of small businesses, and workers especially, it's been another disaster. So it's always a question, is it working for whom? I think it's working for some. It's definitely not working for the many. So that's why there's a lot of political support at the elite level for the European Union, which partly answers your question. Despite all this, we keep seeing more centralization, more integration, because there are very powerful sectors in society that benefit from the existence of the European Union and have every interest in the European Union surviving. I would say the overwhelming majority of European citizens will be better off without the European Union, but of course they have, precisely as a result of the existence of the European Union, they have less and less of a voice, and they have less and less of a way of making their voice heard in the political system, which is why it's so hard to challenge the European Union and the policies that come from it.
Yeah. Speaking about centralism, there is a point that Peter already put on the table. I wanted to ask David about it, and then of course you, Peter, as well. Centralism to a lot of people means Germany and France running the European Union together. I don't have this impression anymore. I see a more oligopolistic European Union. I see a European Union when the Baltics count, Poland count as well, and also where Germany and France are much, much weaker. I mean, don't you think it's a bit of a slogan, this couple, Franco-German couple, that is basically ruling everything to its own benefit? I don't see it. What about you, David? And Peter, also happy to get your views on that.
I too don't think that this German-French couple is still something that is very strongly alive. I think it is more and more shifting towards a German hegemony over the European Union. I think that seems to be quite clearly, and that is of course on the long run a problem. But I would like to come back a bit to this issue of the future of Europe. I consider myself as a European patriot. That is, I love this European civilization, and I see very strongly how people from Portugal to the Baltic states, from Scotland right down to Italy, we all belong to a common civilization. That is so obvious for everyone going into a church, into a museum, into an opera house. We all belong to one civilization. So we need to defend that civilization, even and precisely so if we want to defend the nation states. Strangely, the nation state by now must be defended on the European level. Unfortunately, the European Union has mutated into the worst enemy of this European civilization that I love so much. But that means that for the moment, I like siding with sovereignists and with nationalists, because I think that for the moment, defending national identity against the wokeism of the European Union is something that is very important, that we should do. But I think that on the long run, we cannot permit our continent to be divided once again into 30-something nation states, because we simply do not have the power to resist these large civilization empires that are rising everywhere. They didn't exist in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the high time of the nation state, we were superior to all the others in terms of demography, technology, military technology, colonies, and so forth. So we could permit ourselves to idealize the nation state. But that is not anymore the case. We do not have 20 or 12-something nation states like in the 19th century. Now there are 30 little nation states, and most of them do not even have the aggregate importance of one larger Chinese town. So we need to work together if we want to defend ourselves. That means we need, on the one hand, to work together, but we also need to replace the ideology that is ruling the European Union by something else. And for the moment, this ideology is multiculturalism, wokeism, globalization, ultraliberalism, and so forth. That is something that would need to be fought. But I think in the long run, once this is fought and once some form of let's say, solid European patriotism and some love for our civilization, for our history has been reinstated, that would mean that we would again need to collaborate very strongly, at least when it comes to key terms of politics. We need to do exactly the contrary than what the European Union does today. Today, as I said, it is impotent outside, it is authoritarian inside. We need to turn it upside down. We need a European cooperation in order to defend us to the outside, but to leave us free inside. And that is a bit my vision of this European future, which is a bit strange because I'm you could say, a European nationalist somehow, and not really a classical European federalist.
I see now, but your question is there still something European about the EU? Can we make the EU European again, basically?
It is working. Slowly and slowly we see that the conservative forces, the patriotic forces are gaining momentum. But I don't think this will go through a democratic way. I think we will have to go through a serious period of unrest, and then we need to change this paradigm.
Yeah, no, it's true that an historian job is not to give us good news. Huh?
Never.
Peter, I'm sure you disagree with David, because from a Hungarian point of view, it must be somehow difficult to swallow what David is exposing.
Well, first of all, if Hungary and Poland and Lithuania would have gotten per capita the same amount of money as Portugal and Spain and Italy got from the Central European powers since they entered the European Union, then we would be a much richer country. And this country is much richer because it is a member of the European Union. That is a fact. You can deny it, but it's something that I believe exists on the plane of facts. There is always an alternative in politics. Politics doesn't exist without an alternative. And we see what the alternative is. The alternative is Serbia. It's a wonderful country. I love it. Great parties in Belgrade. Everyone should go. But there are problems in Serbia that means that the state works in a worse way because it is not a member of this community, which I am actually very critical with. But these two things, I believe, can exist at the same time. The other thing is that this I want to bring it back. Oh, the 19th century, we didn't have our private own little country in the 19th century. It was a good time, but there were some problems. But also the 19th century, why was the West rich? The West was rich because the rest of the world was not rich. This is also a historical fact. Imperialism is a historical fact. The West is rich because of imperialism, which the East of Europe did not participate in, and the West views its decline from this imperialist high, which we were never there, and it is very, very sad that this is declining, which, and the aggregate importance will not be that of a Chinese province, and why is that important? If there are more people in that Chinese province, then of course it will be more important. Because the period in the world when the small Western European states could have this outsized influence has gone. It is dead. It will never come back. But this is, again, not our problem. We had Franz Josef Land as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which had 3 polar bears in the northern part of Russia, but that was it. And the other issue with regards to the European Union, when we ask the Hungarians whether they like the European Union, they like the European Union. This is partly an economic issue. But what they actually like more, and I believe the two exist at the same time, is NATO. They love NATO. Hungarians love NATO. It is very good that they do.
But NATO seems to love you a bit less now. NATO seems to love you less, to love Hungary less.
No, NATO has a problem with the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister is not in the same body as the country. No matter how some people try to view it otherwise, the Prime Minister is someone who is elected by the people, but that doesn't mean that he himself is the country as such. Not since a long time ago. So I don't think even the Prime Minister would say, to be honest, that there is an alternative to NATO. So, and since the United States hegemony, which you can criticize a lot, but the United States hegemony for my generation brought a world that has been radically better than my parents' generation. And since people in the West don't seem to understand this,
You think NATO brought that?
Well, the acceptance into NATO was the final point of the death of the Soviet Empire, yes. So these two are intertwined. And I believe if you don't take into account that of a lot of people in the East, then you can talk about how horrible the bombing in Iraq was, or all these things that were horrible. But for this region of the world, even if this is an imperfect political edifice, it's still a better edifice than any other alternative.
Thank you. I'm very tempted to ask you like a speed dating question. If you want to avoid the EU from collapsing, give me two things that Mrs. von der Leyen or anyone else in the EU should do. I'm going to give you a bit of time to think about it. People from the organization, can we ask questions or not? We still have 4 minutes, because we have to answer this one. Yes, no, hello, no. Maybe not, because it's true that 3 guests and 3 minutes is a bit too much. So let's go for that last question, and then again, remember, I'm going to ask you to clap again. Namel Falaitete. Thomas, I know you want the EU to collapse, but let's be constructive. What should it do to avoid the collapse if it ever happens?
Well, I think von der Leyen should resign. That would be.
She has just been elected.
That would be a great step forward. Yeah, I know. I'm dreaming, you know. I'm allowed to dream. Look, I mean, European Union. That you can't expect the European Union elites to to rethink this organization. That's impossible. They benefit from it too much. I think we need to increase the pressure on the European Union elites to, at the very least, start implementing some. I think what we need is more democracy. So at the very least, we should be, we should try to make the European Commission and the European institutions more in general, more accountable, more transparent. I think that would solve a lot of the problems that we have in the European Union today, which ultimately boil down to the fact that we are governed by a completely unaccountable institution, which isn't acting in the best interest of the European people. It's not acting in the general interests, the strategic interests of Europe. It's acting on behalf of other interests, I would say, vested interests, vested private interests, and I would say even the vested interests of foreign powers. First and foremost, our supposed allies in Washington, but they're not acting in the best interest of Europe.
Thank you, David. I know you want the EU to collapse so that we can build a brand new one which is based on the European civilization, but still, in order to save us a little civil war in between, what would you recommend?
I think there are 2 important points, as you said. 2 points. Well, there are 2 that seem evident to me. On the one hand, Europe needs to finally stop rejecting its history and its identity, as it does for the moment. It needs once again to be proud of its history, about its identity, and to show more and more to the people this loyalty with our common past. So in order also to show to the people from the different European nations how they belong together. I think we need this total shift in ideology on the one hand, and on the other hand we need to have a true foreign policy. For the moment we are just an object of others, because you said that why is this a problem if China becomes so important? Well, there is no vacuum in history. So if we leave others alone, that doesn't mean that we will be left alone. And for the moment, I see this risk of European countries becoming more and more torn between the interests of the Chinese with their Silk Road, of the Russians with their influence, of Islam with its many foundations, of the United States, who also try to use their influence. So for the moment, there's a real risk of seeing Europe fragmented and torn, and the only way out of that is to lead, once again, a true European foreign policy that protects our interests, also our strategic interest in the rest of the world. And that could also fuse the Europeans together into a community of destiny.
So, not so Atlantist as Peter has been. Peter, what about you? 2 things you would suggest to Mrs. von der Leyen?
First, the enlargement into the Western Balkans. So letting in Albania, Serbia, Bosnia, which would mean that there would be people of Muslim faith in the European Union, but thank God they would. So that's one. The other thing, I think would be very important is to spend more money on military. 2%. 2% NATO, everyone should do it. I know that some are not members of NATO, but that's because of a Cold War agreement, but the rest are all members of NATO, so spend the 2%. Poland is doing it very well.
So a Polish approach to defense, no? And start with protecting yourself within NATO, basically.
Exactly.
Thank you. So, 10, 8, 7 seconds. We don't have time for questions. Too many good ideas from the stage, but we do have time to vote. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you the question again. Do you think that the European Union is going to collapse in the near future? So, those who think it's going to collapse, please clap now. And those who think that the European Union is not going to collapse, please. I see a little asymmetry between the stage and the audience, and this is what I call intellectual diversity, the only one that really counts. Please join me to thank our three great speakers, Peter Ungart, David Engels, Thomas Fazi. Köszönöm szépen.
Köszönöm.